Hi everyone, it's Ren here. I hope you're well, guys. Welcome to my room. Technically, this is not my bedroom. It's way too large to be my bedroom. It's the living room where I'm staying at the moment. I'm feeling a bit lazy and I want a bit of a change, so I decided to record the video from here. I like the fact that there is a little globe here because it reminds me of, it reminds me of my cosmopolitanism and also of certain pictures of the philosopher Heraclitus, for those who know him, that I admire quite a bit. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the topic of honesty. And I think that as per my practice for some time, but perhaps more consciously and more deliberately than ever, I will tackle this topic from the point of view, this divergence, interpretive divergence, or I don't even really know how to name it, but trying to provoke thoughts, trying to conceive of this particular concept or this particular word and what it means in a way that goes a little further than what we typically imagine. Obviously, honesty is a virtue. I think that, if you ever come across someone who argues to you that honesty is a vice, which is actually not ethically inconsistent. How unbelievable is that, to think that, considering that honesty is a vice is not ethically inconsistent. That's another topic, a difficult topic. And this is a topic that, this is something that Nietzsche was one of the first to maybe not just understand, but explore in his work. The philosophical underpinnings of this position are complex, but essentially the meta-ethical valuation, or the way you arrive at values, are not a priori. There's no meta-ethical basis for the goodness or badness of values, or the virtue or vice. You always need to kind of adopt a model that is not meta-ethical, that is ethical, to determine whether these values are values that are good or bad. If this is the kind of valuation that you want to embrace, because you don't have to embrace a good versus bad evaluation or good versus evil. So that's a whole other topic. If you guys are interested, I can maybe talk about it in a different video, because as a matter of fact, in my own philosophy, my valuation, my moral, I do embrace a kind of moral valuation, but it is not one of, if you like, good or bad or good or evil. Don't worry, I don't consider in that model of mine that honesty is a vice. I'm just saying it's impossible essentially to prove rationally that it is a virtue. Let us assume that it is a virtue because it has all the great advantages we know it has. What's led me to this topic is that it seems to me that in the same way that there are different kinds of intelligence, and the way that there are different kinds of, quality of friendship. Some friends can be great listeners when you need them to listen, and others can be bad listeners, especially if they're extroverts. I'm kidding. And yet maybe the listeners that are bad are those that will give you more practical help whenever you need something practical, like, I need an apartment, I need to be sorted out tonight for whatever, an apartment, a car, can you help me out with that? Maybe it is the bad listener that will prove to be more reliable than the good listener. So each friend brings their own virtues, or rather each friendship has its own way of being virtuous. I think honesty itself comes at different levels, and I'm not going to try in this video to start analyzing the detail of those different dimensions, but I wanted to maybe emphasize two dimensions. There's obviously the honesty that consists in speaking your mind, right? So perhaps this is the most common sense definition or understanding that people have of honesty. Someone is honest when they say something, they say what they think. They say what's really they believe in themselves, what is their real opinion. And so by opposition, on this definition of honesty, someone who's dishonest is someone who tells you something, but that's not what they really think. And we like sometimes to call this vice, if you want to call it a vice, in opposition to the virtue of honesty, duplicity, for instance. In the Proust In Search of Lost Time book that I'm reading still, nearing the end, there are lots of duplicitous characters, not many honest characters. Of course, honesty sometimes, we like to say, especially in politics, can lead you to ruin, and so you have to sort of embrace duplicity to an extent. But I'm saying, at this certain level, the honesty of someone who says what they think, yeah, it's a good thing. I do believe that. It's a real great personal quality to have. I'm committed to that. Is that sufficient, though? Perhaps it's not. A human being is always in the process of perfecting itself. We are finite, we can never be perfect, so we always have potential for improvement. One of the potentials for improvement is increasing in the quality of honesty as speaking one's mind, your thoughts. But perhaps there is this other dimension of honesty, which is not so much this more discursive or intellectual kind of honesty that we just defined as the commonsensical kind of one, the one that people understand straight away when they think about someone as honest or as dishonest. But there is also this emotional honesty. And again, not saying that there's only these two, but these are the two that I've had in mind for a couple of days. And it seems to me that emotional honesty and intellectual honesty are not actually necessarily correlated in someone. And that it is possible for someone to be intellectually honest, but not necessarily emotionally honest with themselves. Because I think that in this case, emotional honesty doesn't have to do with telling people what you think or communicating the raw content of what you think to people. Of course, you can express it in diplomatic language, but the gist of being honest in this sense is to speak your mind, not invent things or not make things so flowery that they end up disfiguring the content of what you wanted to express. But emotional honesty really has to do with yourself. It has to do with being willing to face up to the way you feel without shame, with a certain level of courage, and without looking away. Because a lot of what you feel is not as rational as what, after all, in the intellectual sense of honesty, is more rational. Up until a certain point, you can make the decision to be honest, intellectually honest. It's hard, it requires courage. But it is still a kind of decision. You still have the power at every moment to be honest. And perhaps it is the case that if the context facilitates being honest and doesn't create too much cost for it, everyone would be honest. For example, I know that if I'm imagine that I'm an honest person, but that if I'm talking to a certain number of people that are really sensitive, maybe I will be tempted to express what I'm saying in diplomatic language. I'll always focus on expressing the truth, but because I know that I'm dealing with people who are sensitive and I don't want to hurt them, it's always possible that at some level I might be tempted to sugarcoat what I'm saying or expressing it in a way that, according to some more straightforwardly honest people, might not be honest. Conversely, if I'm talking to 5 ESTJs, 5 people that can really take criticism well and are quite sturdy and robust in this sense, I allow myself to be more straightforward and, in a sense, more honest. So you can see that intellectual honesty depends on external circumstances, and it winds up being about a rational choice of some kind. You have power over the level of honesty that you want to exert vis-a-vis other people. Emotional honesty is different because you feel things, and a lot of the time what we feel it without having willed the feeling of it. We feel it without the intervention of our reason. We just happen to feel these things, and a lot of the time, especially when things happen in our unconscious, what we feel can be hard to admit, not just to others, but to ourselves. You can be the most successful person in the world and feel, you could have been raised in a family where maybe your brother was, or your sister was, she doesn't have as great a career, perhaps, but you always had the sense that the parents preferred her, and perhaps as a result you've always had this inferiority complex vis-a-vis this person. Perhaps this is even what contributed partly to motivating you to be such a high achiever in society. Admitting not only to oneself that there is this inferiority complex, but being able to voice it to oneself requires a level of emotional honesty that is quite remarkable. And I'm using only this example, but I am convinced that there is an immensity of things we feel that we do not want to admit to ourselves, especially when it pertains to jealousy, when it pertains to envy, when it pertains to Schadenfreude, when it pertains to all these drives that we have that are not fully conscious, and yet we're kind of aware of them. We can feel it when something happens and confirms that we have been feeling this way. If there's someone we really dislike, something happens to them, and we kind of realize we're almost happy. Now, these are things that are not nice, but everyone, even people who are morally upright and intellectually very honest, are likely to feel these things because that's humanity for you, the unconscious is not a domain that we have control over. And it is very, very buried, profound in who we are, in the way that the context in which we were born, the way we were educated, our relationship with our parents, the formative years of our childhood. And to be able to look at these things and be not necessarily destroy these feelings, because they exist, but to admit them, to make them your own. I mean, obviously it is part of the whole process of self-awareness and self-acceptance, but I think that the link it has with intellectual honesty is that sometimes I think what can happen is that the apparently honest thing that a person is saying when they're speaking their mind, this external kind of honesty, is conditioned by the emotional dishonesty that they have in regard to themselves. And so that they think that they're speaking their mind, whereas in fact, what their mind is rationally telling us is a disfigurement and a repression, and sometimes the opposite of what their feelings are really telling them. And they're trying to transfigure it into the opposite in their reason. And they think that they're being honest when they're expressing this thing. Of course, nobody can really see that. But what I'm saying is, when someone is speaking their minds, that's fine. But you sort of have to assume that their mind is reliable. And by reliable, I mean in touch with their real feelings. And often our mind, the conscious, rational side of our mind, is not in touch with our real feelings. And so what may appear to be something that is very honest in appearance might actually be the expression of a form of emotional duplicity with oneself. And perhaps emotional honesty with oneself can greatly facilitate the likelihood of intellectual honesty in turn. I don't know if it is. We could perhaps say that to be maximally honest in general, emotional honesty with oneself is a necessary condition. I'm not sure if it is a sufficient condition. It is a necessary condition, in my opinion. However, I think that intellectual honesty by itself is not a sufficient condition, or even for emotional honesty. Emotional honesty is something that belongs to a different domain, belongs to the domain of one relating to oneself, and probably requires a very different kind of willingness. It's not a rational willingness. It doesn't have to do with the same sort of, virtue of being upright. It's something else. But the two are connected in a way that I think is often overlooked. So this was my little musing session on this topic of honesty. Let me know what you think in the comments, guys, and I'll see you very soon. And this is the half week, so I hope your week is great so far. Ciao.